Do 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 dee la 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 ba 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 bum da 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 dum. How I changed from red to blue. 3 of 4. Unbeknownst to me, the seeds for my transformation from Republican to proud supporter of the Just Say No to MAGA Democrats were planted during my sophomore year at Sherwood when I landed a tiny part in Sherwood High's production of To Kill a Mockingbird. I enjoyed my little bit part as Walter Cunningham, and 6 states later, in 2010, I stepped into a short skit in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I followed the short skit with a full-length play where I met Michael. Prior to our being cast together, I'd seen Michael perform on stage, but had never met him. One day during rehearsal while we were chatting, he mentioned that he'd recently mysteriously lost an inordinate amount of weight. Trying to be funny, I responded to his confidence with the completely insensitive, "Well, it's a good thing you're not gay, huh?" referencing the wasting away that HIV and AIDS then wreaked upon the infected. Michael smiled but said nothing in return. He and I got on very well during both the rehearsals and the production, and a short time later, Michael and I were in another production together. One day, he began rhapsodizing about his new boyfriend. Embarrassed by my previous joke to him, I apologized for being both crass and insensitive. Michael looked at me and said he had no idea what I was talking about, something I found very difficult to believe then and still do. Some people have enormous hearts filled with love and forgiveness, and Michael is one of them. I'm fond of saying that we are all products of our time and our environment, and I am certainly part of that we. When I was born, blatant racism was part of America's fabric, a value far too many Christian nationalists continue to embrace today. Though my 1920s born parents were religious, they were far ahead of their time concerning what Martin Luther King prognosticated in his I Have a Dream speech. The one where he said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." My parents grew up in a time and place where white supremacy was taken for granted by the vast majority of white-skinned people. But my father in particular learned firsthand the inequity, the inequality, the waste of human beings with which whites burdened blacks while he served in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War. And what he learned, he preached to his 5 children. Of course, we're all only human, and early teaching from the cradle, inculcation of values, good and bad, infects all of us. I was born a year prior to the first step in decriminalizing same-sex sexual relationships. Until 1962, homosexual activity was illegal throughout the United States. Coincidentally, it was Illinois that first decriminalized gay sex, though it took our final holdout state, Texas, until 2003 to have sex between consenting adults legal regardless of plumbing via Lawrence v. Texas. Homosexuality remained and remains taboo to too many in the U.S., and openly hating gays, conflating homosexuality with pedophilia, blaming gay people for any STDs a gay person contracts, while declaring it to be God's will if they die from AIDS, while telling heterosexuals who get STDs to be more careful and to get a shot of penicillin, was still rampant through the 20th century and, absurdly, lives on in the hearts of many MAGA folk. My upbringing did not include the openly contemptuous and discriminatory comments towards gays that I just described, but sentiments were just below the surface. When Arthur Ashe contracted AIDS, I recall my father saying that it wasn't Ashe's fault, that he contracted AIDS because an infection was a result of a blood transfusion rather than sin. Were my parents homophobic? Of course they were. It was de rigueur for their time, but they did not shout hate. Regardless, as stated, all of us are products of our time and place, and my time and place included my church, insisting that homosexuality, even for committed monogamous couples, was not only sinful, it was also perversion. While I did not embrace this prejudice, there is no doubt that it influenced me. I was not hateful, I was respectful, but I was infected with the them illness, an illness tens of millions of Americans continue to embrace. My inculcation against this absurd prejudice was provided by scores of many lovely, loving gay people with whom I've had the pleasure of sharing a stage or working with, including Michael. My greater familiarity with LGBTQ most definitely did not breed contempt. Rather, it planted a seed that grew into greater understanding, acceptance, and love. Sadly, homophobia, like racism, both of which should be anathema, are most decidedly part of the Republicans' family values code that not only preach and perpetuate hate for other, but for which they pick and choose Bible passages to bolster their jihad of hatred.